Hi, and welcome to another edition of GLP's 10 out of 10. And today we're honored to have with us American designer Rob Koenig. Rob grew up in Florida and found his way into the lighting industry there. He's worked extensively as a programmer, lighting director, associate lighting designer on a multitude of live shows, as well as being a highly accomplished lighting designer in his own right. He is absolutely a true collaborator, and he's also an award nominee. He's worked on designs for artists including Billy Idol, Papa Roach, Matchbox 20, J.Cole, Ministry, Carrie Underwood, and Eric Church, to name just a few. However, Rob is probably best known for his work with global rock band Metallica, with whom he has worked since 2008 as programmer, lighting director, and more recently as their lighting designer, creating some truly amazing shows. Welcome, Rob Koenig.
Hello,
How
Mr.
are you?
Ravenhill. I've been dying to tell you this for so many years now, but your name is the rock and roll name, Mark Ravenhill. Like you should have been like the bass player in Richie Blackmore's Rainbow or Dio.
Right.
I mean, Ravenhill is like the best last name ever.
It's,
I just been dying to tell you this forever, but we've never gotten around to it. But
there,
yeah, Mark Ravenhill is the greatest rock and roll name ever.
there you go. Thank you. I'll start getting some t-shirts made up.
Very well should. Absolutely.
All right, let's kick it off with the first one. So, going all the way back to the start of your career, what was your first show as a designer?
The first time I actually got to design a singular show for a band, we were working out of Florida, and we would do all these hit and run shows. And Cellar Door, Phantasma, whatever promoter would buy 3 shows from the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Marilyn Manson, Faith No More, all these bands, and
Right.
we'd go and do the club circuit. So the first one I got to do as an LD, and not just teching for somebody, was Space Hog. They didn't have an LD, and I absolutely loved what they were doing. So I got to design the little rig that we were going to use for them for those 3 shows, and I got to run it, and it was exhilarating.
Right.
Loved it. That was when I really fell in love with this.
Fantastic. Okay, so over that course of your career so far, obviously starting at that scale, as you mentioned, back in Florida, up to obviously some of the biggest shows in the world that you currently do. I'm sure you must have had a couple of Spinal Tap moments where it didn't all quite go according to plan. Is there one particular one that you remember and you'd like to share?
In the earlier days, because I was one of the few responsible adults on a tour that didn't drink, didn't really do drugs, didn't do anything like that, suddenly I got tapped to be the production manager all the time. And this one time I was with Live. The band name is very important to the story. You'll understand why in a minute.
All right.
So the band was Live. They'd just released a record, and we were about to go into Canada. So I sat down with a couple of guys in the crew, sat down with our truck driver, and I started going over everything that we needed to do to go into the Canadian border, all the paperwork and everything. I'd already gotten the brokerage firm all lined up. And I said to the truck driver at one point, I'm sure you've crossed the Canadian border 100 times. You already know all this stuff, but I just want to go over it and make sure that everything's all dialed. And he's like, great. This old redneck dude, he was an absolute sweetheart. Well, about 2 hours later after our meeting, he comes over to me and he goes, hey man, you know when you said I'd been across the Canadian border a bunch? And I go, yeah. And he goes, I've never done it. And I'm like, oh, okay. You're carrying sound and lighting equipment. That's all you need to know. And he's like, okay. I find out after we get across the border, he gets across, no real issues. He comes up to me and he goes, man, he goes, I get to the border and he goes, they go, what are you hauling? I go, it's sound and lighting equipment. And I give them all the manifest and everything. And they go, okay, well, let's open up the back. So we open up the back and the customs agent jumps up. And the first case he sees is the snake's trunk. So what does the case say on the top of it? Live snakes.
Brilliant.
Customs agent jumps out of the back. Boy, what the hell are you bringing across our border? He goes, man, I don't know, but it's not a live snake. I swear.
Right.
It's just classic moment.
That's
live
brilliant.
Snakes on that trunk.
Brilliant. So over your years, what's the best piece of advice that anyone's ever given you?
The best advice anybody ever gave me was get the fuck over yourself.
Right.
I was very young, and you get into these mindsets because you start working with all these LDs traveling through that the show is all about me and my lights and all this, and you start parroting these kinds of attitudes that start rolling through, and you start kind of, well, this guy's successful, that must be the way to do this. And the first time somebody said it to me, hit me right between the eyes like a ton of bricks. Get the fuck over yourself. It's not about you. Yeah. It's about the band on stage. It's about the 1, 2, 10, 50,000 people in the room. It ain't about you. You make a mistake, you get by it. You're dealing with a problem, you deal with it. It's not about you. Just those few words to me, get the fuck over yourself, meant the world to me, and it changed my path.
Right. Obviously, you've had a long career so far as well. What would you say professionally is your proudest achievement?
In 2016, my dear friend Phil Ely called me to do the Guns N' Roses reunion with him.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a pretty major moment. It was funny because as he was chatting with me on the phone, it didn't hit me. I hung up the phone. I'm like, oh, these are the reunion shows. Holy shit. Like, it hit me like a ton of bricks right away. So I got to go out and play programmer and lighting director for him for a time on that in 2016. And then we passed it off to somebody else when Metallica got busy. But in I want to say, I can't remember, it's 2017 or 2018, the Metallica tour is rolling through Denver. And it goes to Mile High Stadium, whatever the corporate sponsor is, I don't remember. But we're rolling up to Mile High Stadium. And on one side of the building, in these giant 60-foot banners, is all of the shows, and they wrap around the top of the stadium. And one right here is for our Metallica show that we're doing the next day. And then 2 over is the Guns N' Roses Not in This Lifetime tour returning to that stadium. Right. And I walk off the bus and I look up, and it just hits me so hard that I'm like, I had a lot to do with both of those shows. That was a moment where I really got to sit back and just really think about that and what I've been able to accomplish. And I got to accomplish working for some of my favorite artists of all time. So that was a pretty big moment for me.
That's fantastic. It makes me realize how far you've come, as you said.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, you know, the pandemic is ongoing still, and we've had various levels of lockdown. What do you normally do in your downtime?
I love spending time with my family. I've got 2 dogs that I spend time with.
Yeah.
When we lived in Florida and we had a house and we had a yard and the whole thing, I love spending time outside in the yard, and I love spending time at the beach. But I don't really have any hobbies or anything outside of what we do. Right. I'll read up a little bit when I'm at home and read up on what everybody else is doing. I'll keep in touch with some people, but for the most part, I don't have any weird little hobbies like friends of mine that work on cars or do this. I love spending time with the family, so that takes up my time when I'm at home.
Yeah, but that's a great way to spend it as well, obviously. Yeah. And your normal schedule, that as you mentioned, that time at home is rarer,
it's precious,
and therefore much more valuable. As you mentioned, you know, you're on the road a lot. You've obviously traveled the world. You've seen a lot of places, seen a lot of venues, worked in a lot of venues. Do you have any particular favorite venue somewhere?
You know, you have the achievements in your life when you get to go do shows at Madison Square Garden, when you get to go do Stade de France, when you get to go do places like that, Wembley, things like that. Nebworth was a big one for me. Right. But favorite venues end up being in like the club and theater level. You know, because those venues have vibe and they've got personality. Right. And maybe not my favorite venues, but fond memories of them, or, oh my God, I got to do the Beacon Theater. You know what I mean? Like going and doing the Beacon Theater was a huge experience for me. Right. I'm an old House of Blues guy. I worked at the House of Blues when I was younger, from like 97 to like 2000, 2001. The Norva in Norfolk, Virginia, I've always loved. They did such a great job on that venue. And then weird venues that are not my favorite places to do a show, but like have a lot of bizarre history, like the Rave Eagles Ballroom in Milwaukee. Good memories from weird venues, you know.
Pick out the weirdest one. So
yeah. But you know, San Francisco Fillmore is another great one to go do. I love that one because of its rich history, you know. So I don't know if I have like a favorite, but definitely some ones that I have fond memories of.
Great, of all of those. Brilliant. That's some great names there. Absolute classic names. Yeah, fantastic. Do you have a particular artist or an album of music that you would absolutely always want to have close by? Again, you know, in the quarantine, a lot of us have spent a lot of time at home. who would you go back to for that?
I went through a huge rush phase, obviously, very early on the pandemic. Nine Inch Nails has been there for me. Faith No More has been there for me. This is a tough choice. I'm going to make the decision right here and now that one record would have to be shit.
So play for time. Play for time.
This is a tough one because it's either going to be Rush Signals, which is a bizarre choice for a lot of people, but Rush Signals was the first one I bought with my own money as a kid, and I absolutely love that album beginning to end, note for note. Most people would choose Moving Pictures, but this was just a continuation of that.
Right.
The second album would be Nine Inch Nails' The Fragile. And the third record would be Faith No More Album of the Year. So I'm going to go Jellyfish Spilt Milk, too. That's another great record. That's another Desert Island record. All right. Here, Now, Rush, Signals.
Rush.
There we go. That would have to be the one I'd have to take to the Desert Island with me.
Right. Okay. That's obviously brilliant choice. Obviously got some extra personal memories in there. Brilliant. Now, if looking back, if you could wind the clock back some years and go and visit the teenage Rob and offer a piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Telling people how good you are is not necessary. This is something that I try to impart on younger people coming up. You don't need to tell people how good you are. They'll notice it. Now, they may not come right out and go, you're really good at what you do. But there's always somebody there, whether it's one of your band members, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a production manager, a tour manager, that will take notice of how good you are. And you don't need to parrot that. You don't need to say it. You don't need to tell anybody. Just keep your head down, do your gig, and do it well, and enjoy it. And get along well with your teammates. And you don't have to tell people how good you are, because the cream always does rise to the top.
Okay, so if you had the opportunity to sit down for coffee with one person, could be living, could be past, and obviously you mentioned a few people, that you've worked with or that you respect already during the conversation. Would it be one of those or somebody else different? If you could,
no, it would be Neil.
It would be Neil, right?
It would be Neil Peart. Yeah, I've always, since my adolescence, I've been very fascinated with him as a person, because he was so much more than a drummer, and not only one of the greatest drummers that we've ever seen. He had his own unique style. He'd sit down behind a kit, you could hear that it was Neil. And that's one thing I really adore about musicians, is not how proficient they are at the instrument. For me, is there a personality there? And that's the thing about Neil. And then you take that from Neil, and not only did he want to be the best at what he did, he constantly trained, and in his mid 40s, he's doing something similar to what I'm doing now and kind of reinventing himself. And he's the inspiration for a lot of this, and doing something new and retrained with Freddie Gruber, who does that in their mid to late 40s and retrains how to play, and that's very inspiring for me. Yeah, so if I ever got the opportunity to have a dinner with Neil Peart, I would love that.
That would be the one. That'd be the one. Really fantastic choice. Absolutely fantastic choice. Yeah, there we are. And we get to our last question. Here we are.
Yes, sir.
So in a moment, when we finish the conversation, you're going to get a phone call from the US Olympic team, and they're going to call you up. Yeah. You are.
You've seen my physique, right?
You're the one they need. Well, it's for everybody. You're the one they need. So it could be for the summer games, or it could be for the winter games. So if they're going to call you up, what's the one thing you'd like to have a go at?
I would say surfing. Since surfing is going to be a new thing in 2020 Olympics, I would have to say surfing, not only because it's finally going to be recognized as a proper sport, but it's something I grew up around. I was a surfer when I was a kid, skateboarded quite a bit when I was a kid.
Okay.
You grow up on the beaches of Florida. That's what you do. Knew a lot of BMX kids. So, and I've always, and the reason we moved to where we did out in California was just because I'd be near the beach. As much as I have my love for the beach, I'd have to say surfing.
Surfing. Brilliant. That'd be great.
Although I'm sure at this point in my life, I'd have a very hard time finding my center of gravity. But we'll work on that.
You get extra points for that, depending on how they do it.
Well played.
There we are. There we are. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, bro.
And
good
see you
seeing you.
soon.
Awesome.
Cheers, Rob.